Ripple was in a meeting at the US Treasury Department. Photos were posted. Names were mentioned. JP Morgan published research citing XRP. DTCC connections surfaced. And within hours, the narrative machine was running at full speed. Institutional adoption, government endorsement, infrastructure integration. The future is here. But here's the question that stops most people cold. What actually happened in that room? And more importantly, what didn't? Because there's a massive difference between being invited to share industry perspective and being chosen to build financial infrastructure. There's a difference between consultation and endorsement, between exploration and implementation. And understanding that difference is worth more than any price prediction. If you're here because you want to understand how financial narratives actually get constructed, subscribe. Because what comes next will change how you process crypto news forever. Let's break down what really happened and what it actually means. Let's start with the facts. The US Treasury Department hosted a transatlantic task force meeting between the United States and the United Kingdom. The purpose? Discussing the future of financial markets, specifically around digital assets and blockchain infrastructure. Who attended? Representatives from the Blockchain Association, companies like Ripple, Jump, and others in the digital asset space. The meeting took place at Treasury headquarters. Photos were shared. Statements were made about collaboration and innovation. This task force was officially formed in September 2025 during a presidential visit to the UK. The stated goal is to provide short and medium-term coordination options on digital assets, plus long-term work on digital infrastructure for major financial markets. They're expected to deliver recommendations to both governments by summer 2026. So Ripple was there. That's confirmed. They've been at multiple such meetings. Casey Crook, Ripple's managing director for Europe, expressed pride in participating. She talked about the importance of US-UK cooperation in digital assets. She positioned the UK as a major financial center with opportunity to lead in digital asset innovation. All of that is factual. All of that happened. And none of it is what most people think it means. Here's where perception starts to diverge from reality. When retail investors see Ripple meeting with Treasury officials, their brain completes a story. Treasury endorsement, government partnership, regulatory approval, XRP becoming official infrastructure. But let's examine what this type of meeting actually is. It's a consultation. It's information gathering. Governments convene industry participants to understand what's happening in a sector before they make policy decisions. They invite companies, academics, trade associations, and other stakeholders to provide input. Being invited to provide input is not the same as being selected to build systems. It means your company is relevant enough in the space that policymakers want to hear your perspective. That's valuable. It indicates influence. But it's not adoption. Think about it this way. If the government is considering regulations around autonomous vehicles, they might invite Tesla, Waymo, and traditional automakers to discuss the technology. That doesn't mean the government has chosen Tesla to build all future transportation infrastructure. It means Tesla has expertise worth consulting. Same logic here. Ripple is a major player in blockchain payments. They've been around for over a decade. They have relationships with banks. They've navigated regulatory challenges. Of course, they're invited to these discussions. They should be. But their presence in the room is not an endorsement of their technology, their business model, or their token. It's recognition that they have relevant experience. Those are fundamentally different things. And this is where narratives become expensive. Because the jump from Ripple attended a policy discussion to XRP is becoming government-sanctioned infrastructure is enormous. It requires assumptions that aren't supported by evidence. Now let's talk about the JP Morgan research that got cited alongside all this. JP Morgan published analysis noting that Ripple and XRP represent a commercial effort built on central bank initiatives for cross-border payment settlement in a market worth $120 billion. They mentioned services like CLS, SWIFT, and Finality, but highlighted Ripple for low cost, instant settlement, and high transparency. People saw that and thought, JP Morgan is validating XRP. But read it again carefully. They said Ripple and XRP represent an effort. They didn't say it's the solution. They didn't say JP Morgan is adopting it. They said it's a commercial initiative in a space that's worth a lot of money. That's market analysis. That's acknowledging that Ripple is one of the players trying to solve cross-border payment inefficiencies, which is true. But market analysis from a major bank is not the same as that bank integrating the technology. In fact, JP Morgan has its own blockchain-based payment system. It's called JP Morgan Coin. They built it internally because they wanted control over their infrastructure. They didn't choose Ripple's technology. They acknowledged Ripple exists in the same problem space they're working in. That's competition, not partnership. Or at best, it's parallel experimentation. Different institutions testing different approaches to the same problem. Some will use Ripple. Some will build their own. Some will use Swift upgrades. Some will wait and see what wins. Being mentioned in research is not adoption. It's observation. And confusing the two leads to mispriced expectations. Then there's the tokenization data. $861 million in real-world assets tokenized on the XRP ledger. That represents 44% market share in tokenized real-world assets. Companies like Control Alt, Vert Capital, Ono, and others using the ledger to tokenize real estate, agricultural assets, treasury bonds, and other securities. That sounds impressive, and in many ways, it is. Tokenization is a growing sector. Real-world assets being represented on blockchains creates efficiency. XRP Ledger has technical features that make it attractive for certain use cases. The growth in this area is real. But let's contextualize what $861 million means. Projections estimate $18.9 trillion in tokenized digital assets by 2033. That's the total market opportunity. XRP Ledger currently has less than 0.1% of that projected market. That's not criticism. That's reality. The sector is nascent. Everyone's market share is tiny compared to where this could go. But tiny current adoption with massive projected growth is not the same as established dominance. And here's the critical part. Even if tokenization explodes and trillions of dollars of assets end up on various blockchains, that doesn't automatically translate to XRP token value. The ledger can process transactions without requiring XRP holdings beyond minimal amounts for fees and anti-spam purposes. Institutions tokenizing assets care about the technology, the settlement speed, the transparency, the cost efficiency. They don't necessarily care about the native token appreciating. In fact, they might prefer stability over volatility. So XRP Ledger adoption for tokenization is genuinely positive for the technology. But the path from technology adoption to token value is indirect. It requires specific economic design choices about how the token is used in the system. And those details matter more than the headline numbers. Now let's examine the DTCC connection because this one gets cited constantly. In 2023, DTCC acquired Secure, a company that Dan Donnie founded. XRP Ledger was one of the original networks supporting Secure's multi-chain interoperability. Ripple had invested $30 million in Secure, which explicitly supported XRP Ledger for digital asset adoption. DTCC processes $3.7 quadrillion in transactions annually. They hold $99.99 trillion in assets. That's real financial infrastructure. If DTCC integrates XRP Ledger, that's meaningful. But here's what actually happened. DTCC acquired Secure. Secure supported multiple blockchains, including XRP Ledger. DTCC then developed a compliance and interoperability framework for digital asset management. In 2025, they received a no-action letter from the SEC, which paved the way for broader token adoption. Notice what's missing from that sequence? DTCC announcing they're exclusively using XRP Ledger, or that they're mandating XRP as the settlement layer, or that they're building all future infrastructure on Ripple's technology. They acquired a company that had multi-chain support. XRP Ledger was one of those chains. That means XRP Ledger is in the conversation. It's part of the infrastructure experimentation. But so are other chains. And DTCC, as a massive clearing and settlement organization, will test multiple technologies before committing to any single solution. Being in consideration is not the same as being chosen. And being chosen for pilot programs is not the same as becoming core infrastructure. These distinctions matter because they determine whether narrative is ahead of reality or aligned with it. Then there's the exchange supply data. From 2021 to late 2024, XRP balances on exchanges grew to about 18 billion tokens. With the start of 2025, that balance started declining from 17.5 billion down to 13 billion. Analysis shows more than 50% reduction in exchange-held XRP over a year to 18 months. People interpret this as supply shock incoming. Tokens moving off exchanges means holders are confident. They're not planning to sell. Less supply on exchanges means any demand spike creates larger price moves. That's basic supply and demand logic. But let's think about what else could cause this pattern. Tokens moving off exchanges could mean long-term holding, or it could mean people moving to cold storage after getting nervous about exchange security. Or it could mean institutional custody arrangements where large holders want assets off public exchanges for compliance reasons. Or it could mean people moving tokens to participate in other activities like staking or liquidity provision. Supply leaving exchanges is one data point. It's interesting, but it's not conclusive evidence of imminent price action. You need to pair it with demand data, with new buyer inflows, with institutional allocation announcements, with concrete use case expansion. The exchange supply chart is a metric. It's not a guarantee. And treating it as a countdown timer to price explosion is how people end up holding through opportunities to take profits or de-risk. Markets are probabilistic, not deterministic. Data points shift probabilities. They don't create certainties. Here's the uncomfortable reality underlying all of this. Ripple is doing real work. They're building technology. They're forming relationships. They're navigating regulatory complexity better than most crypto companies. They're in conversations that matter. That's all true. But being in conversations is not the same as winning the race. Technology that works in pilots doesn't always get adopted at scale. Companies with strong government relationships don't always translate that into market dominance. First movers often get overtaken by later entrants who learned from early mistakes. The financial system is slow to change by design. Regulators are cautious. Banks are risk-averse. Adoption curves for infrastructure take decades, not quarters. SWIFT has been trying to improve for years. Central banks have been exploring digital currencies for a decade. None of this moves fast. So when Ripple attends Treasury meetings and gets mentioned in JP Morgan research and sees tokenization growth on their ledger, that's progress. Real, measurable progress. But it's progress in a marathon, not a sprint. And marathons have a way of humbling people who celebrate at mile 5 thinking they've already won. The question isn't whether Ripple is doing impressive things. They are. The question is whether the current expectations and narratives around XRP are proportional to the actual progress being made, or whether they're running ahead of reality. And from where I'm sitting, analyzing this objectively, the narrative is running ahead. Not wildly, not insanely, but ahead, which means risk, which means the possibility that reality needs time to catch up, and that time might include price consolidation or even retracement. That's not bearish. That's probabilistic thinking. It's acknowledging that even good news can be overinterpreted. Even real progress can be priced in before it delivers financial results. So what's the takeaway? How should you think about news like Ripple attending Treasury meetings? First, separate signal from noise. The signal is that Ripple has influence in policy discussions. That's valuable. It means they're shaping conversations about how digital assets get regulated. That creates strategic advantage. The noise is assuming influence equals adoption, or that consultation equals endorsement. Second, understand the timeline. Policy discussions that happen in 2025 might lead to frameworks in 2026, pilot programs in 2027, and actual implementation in 2028 or beyond. That's not pessimism. That's how government and institutional adoption works. If you're investing based on these developments, you need a timeline that matches reality, not hype. Third, distinguish between technology adoption and token value. XRP Ledger can succeed as technology without XRP, the token experiencing proportional price appreciation. That's not a flaw in the system. It's a design characteristic of how the token economics work. Understanding that protects you from false expectations. Fourth, demand specificity. When you hear about partnerships, integrations, or adoption, ask what that actually means. Is it a pilot? A full deployment? Optional functionality? Mandatory infrastructure? The details determine whether news is material or just interesting. Fifth, watch for divergence between narrative strength and fundamental progress. If the story is getting bigger faster than the measurable metrics, that's a warning sign. Narratives that run ahead of fundamentals eventually correct. Either the fundamentals catch up or the narrative crashes. You want to be positioned accordingly. And finally, maintain perspective. Ripple being at Treasury meetings is good. Tokenization growing on XRP ledger is good. Research mentions are good. But good isn't the same as game-changing. Good is incremental progress. Game-changing is when actual settlement volume, actual institutional mandates, actual financial infrastructure locks in around specific technology. We're in the incremental progress phase. That phase can last years. And during that time, prices can do anything. They can go up on optimism. They can go down on impatience. They can chop sideways on uncertainty. Your job isn't to predict what the price will do. Your job is to understand what the news actually means, assess whether expectations are proportional to reality, and position yourself accordingly with risk management that protects you if the story doesn't unfold as expected. If this changed how you process crypto news and institutional partnerships, subscribe. We're here to cut through narrative construction and explain what's really happening. Not to be bullish or bearish, just to be clear. Drop a comment if this reframed your perspective on Treasury meetings and regulatory presence. Let's have a real conversation about how to interpret this stuff without getting caught in hype cycles. Because real wealth isn't built on believing every positive headline. It's built on understanding the difference between signal and noise, between progress and adoption, between potential and reality. That's the edge that compounds. And it's available to anyone willing to think clearly instead of emotionally.